Part 1. The Union Splits. Lincoln elected, 1860.
In 19th century fog, one flag held two hearts, and a hairline crack began to breathe. Cotton looked like snow, yet chains rang underneath, and the land learned to profit from silence.
Hammers kept time. Rails became iron veins, and distance shrank faster than prayers could travel.
In 1860, Lincoln's name landed, like a pin on old glass, and the crack widened.
South Carolina stepped away first, ink pretending to cut history, yet the paper resisted the tear. One state became many. Stars fell like paper snow, and a new border shadowed the old. A confederacy raised its own stage. Davis spoke with calm ink, and the audience held its breath. Messages raced on wired breath, faster than mercy, and every click sharpened the coming dawn.
The sea became a noose. Ships breathed smoke and law, and ports learned hunger's first lesson.
On paper, the nation began to split, lines hardening into sides, while every message arrived a little heavier than the last. Inside Sumter's throat, men folded like paper under thunder, each blast redefining Union.
He asked for volunteers, and the city answered like a rising tide, carrying boys into iron weather.
Boots found a rhythm, rails promised speed, and goodbye letters tasted like fresh ink and fear. Hesitant states tilted, then ink tipped them over, and the middle ground disappeared overnight.
News traveled as electric breath, and towns lit up like embers, each spark asking who would bleed.
Cheers rose like smoke, yet beneath them, families counted chairs, and the crack kept time. War entered by envelope, quietly, politely, then grief unfolded with the creak of paper. Lines formed in mud and whispers, scouts stitched the dark, and distances began to close.
At Bull Run, courage met confusion. Smoke taught new soldiers that war refuses rehearsal.
Retreat tore the day open, uniforms became fleeing scraps, and Washington tasted panic in dust. He stared into fog, defeat echoing softly, realizing the nation had bought years with blood.
They tried to stitch the flag, but ink kept bleeding through, as if history refused bandages. The storm assembled its machines, rail, wire, and fire, and the year closed like a tightening fist.
Part 2. Industrial Storm. Shiloh, April 1862.
In 1862, camps multiplied, and wires hummed above mud, turning waiting into a weapon. The river markers shifted quickly, his fingertips setting direction in the damp air, and the waterways began to widen into a route. At Shiloh, dawn turned to slaughter, trees swallowed screams, and the numbers started growing teeth.
New Orleans went quiet, under cannon smoke and river law, and the South felt its throat tighten. On the peninsula, marshes slewed ambition, and Richmond stayed distant behind a curtain of rain.
Mud fought every wheel, men pushed like bent puppets, and the front line learned exhaustion.
7 days slammed the door, retreats scraped the earth raw, and summer tasted like burnt ink. Lee's calm entered the fire, like ink that doesn't tremble, and the east tightened around Richmond.
August heat marched with them, rails and rumors racing ahead, and Washington felt a shadow returning.
Second Bull Run shattered balance, orders dissolved in smoke, and fear learned the road to Washington. In Washington's corridors, Lincoln carried a quiet weight, and each telegraph pulse made the walls feel thin. Lee crossed the Potomac, carrying war into northern air, and autumn suddenly felt sharpened.
At Antietam's cornfield, stalks and men fell together, and daylight turned thick with red.
The bloody lane filled like a gutter, each volley pouring more, until silence looked ashamed.
At the bridge, water carried echoes downstream, while men climbed into fire like rigid paper. Night fell on Antietam. Not victory, not defeat, just a ledger of breath and bodies. Across the ocean, hands paused. Antietam cooled their appetite, and intervention drifted back into fog.
After Antietam, Lincoln wrote a fuse, words meant to burn chains if rebellion refused.
Ink became a lantern, not ending war, but changing its meaning so the world could see. In slave quarters, rumors stirred, hope rising carefully, like paper trying not to tear too soon.
Drills kept grinding, factories feeding the rhythm, and the war began to look like industry.
In the South, anger hardened, freedom sounded like invasion, and paper tore with clenched hands.
At Fredericksburg, men climbed a wall of bullets, and winter learned the color of cloth.
Hospitals stitched what battle ripped, lanterns trembling over paper skin, and mercy worked overtime.
Lincoln held losses in his hands, as if paper could weigh souls, and still he wrote.
The telegraph counted faster, grief became arithmetic, and the nation listened to numbers breathing. Time narrowed to a date. December dragging its feet, while January waited with a key.
On January 1st, Lincoln's pen struck like flint, and a moral fire entered the war.
Chains did not vanish, but they cracked in the mind first, and fear changed sides. The era changed its mask, steel and ink arguing in the dark, and the next year arrived with a heavier step.
Part 3, The Turning Point. Chancellorsville, May 1863.
In tangled woods at Chancellorsville, shadows moved like blades. Jackson swung wide in silence, a hidden hinge of the battle, and the Union line began to bend.
The flank struck like thunder. Men turned into scattered cutouts, and the forest swallowed direction.
Night betrayed Jackson, friendly fire like blind ink, and victory suddenly tasted metallic and wrong.
Jackson faded by lantern light, the war losing its sharpest shadow, and fate kept marching anyway. Lee held the news quietly, as if paper could wound, and his calm learned a missing piece.
Lee moved north for air and leverage, a gambler's walk, while the crack followed like a shadow.
They crossed into Pennsylvania, boots drinking river cold, and farms listened for approaching iron.
Gettysburg began by accident. A town turned into a hinge, and July opened with gunsmoke.
On the rocky flank, they held like a hook in earth, and the line refused to slide. The wheat field churned, waves of men folding and unfolding, and the ground learned to remember. Before the charge, silence lined up in ranks, and bravery tightened like stitched paper.
They crossed open ground into a wall of ink and iron, and hope began to shred.
The charge came back broken, flags sagging like wet paper, and victory slipped out of reach.
Rain fell on Gettysburg, washing nothing clean, and the land held 3 days of echoes.
Lincoln read the field's verdict, relief braided with horror, and the crack shifted its weight. Words gathered in him, not yet a speech, but a weight, waiting for a graveyard.
While Gettysburg cooled the east, Grant tightened Vicksburg's ring, patient as a turning screw.
On the Mississippi, iron boats argued with bluffs, and the river carried war like a spine.
Assaults broke on dirt walls, courage spent in seconds, so Grant chose hunger over glory.
Inside Vicksburg, hunger became a clock, ticking behind earthworks and prayers. On July 4th, a white flag rose quietly. The Mississippi became a blade, splitting supply and hope, and the Confederacy breathed in halves.
Even the North erupted, draft rage and racism twisting together, while victory still smelled like smoke.
Two headlines arrived together, Gettysburg and Vicksburg, and the war's balance
floated
finally
above the
leaned.
earth.
Autumn turned the focus westward. Chattanooga marked in ink, a gate the South could not ignore.
On Lookout Mountain, men climbed into cloud ink.
At Missionary Ridge, the slope became a ladder of smoke, and momentum replaced hesitation.
Rails stretched southward, supply turning into strategy, and the gate to the deep South creaked open. By winter's edge, turning points hardened into pressure, and 1864 arrived with teeth bared. Grant took command, quiet as a tightened fist, and the war prepared to be spent.
Part 4. Total War and Surrender. Petersburg, 1864-65.
In the wilderness, fire and smoke erased directions, and bodies found no clean place to fall. Spotsylvia's angle drank days, men grinding like gears, and the earth refused to close. Grant didn't retreat. He slid southward again, turning battle into relentless arithmetic. Old Harbor answered in seconds, whole lines cut down, and command tasted bitterly human.
They kept moving anyway, south like a vow, and the road itself became strategy. Petersburg became a stitched wound, trenches multiplying nightly, and time turned into mud.
In trenches, life narrowed to damp breaths and waiting, until death felt ordinary. The crater opened like a mouth, swallowing plans and men, and chaos wore a uniform. Lincoln weighed the cost again, each report a
single
heavier
line,
stone, and the landscape itself seemed to realign.
He studied the junctions, where lines carried time and distance, and with one trace, the plan became motion.
Atlanta fell, smoke writing its own headline, and the war stepped closer to every kitchen.
Ballots spoke in quiet room, decision landing with a single beat, and the nation's direction sharpened into focus.
The column moved with measured purpose, roots tightening into a single line, and the landscape itself seemed to realign.
Pressure reached barns and bread, beyond uniforms and speeches, and ordinary hands learned how planning truly works. The coast received the message, quiet proof the route had reached open water, and could carry news back again.
With one vote, the promise hardened into law, and ink sounded like thunder.
Resources grew thin, and the camp moved more slowly, listening to winter, counting what remained. A seam finally split, earthworks opening, and the air changed overnight. Paper lifted into the air, and the city shifted in motion, learning how to move without certainty.
He walked those streets without ceremony, carrying only fatigue, while a new morning quietly took shape.
In a quiet room, a pen marked agreement, and the air finally learned how to loosen. Perils became bridges, letting defeated men go home so the nation could try stitching. The Union rejoined on paper first, pins and promises, while the crack lingered as a scar.
In a theater's laughter, a single shot tore the air, and history flinched awake again.
Morning arrived in silence, The room held its breath, and farewell stitched itself into every shadow.
Reconstruction began with paperwork, names reclaimed from silence, and freedom needed desks, not drums.
In the shadows, terror organized, masks replacing laws, and freedom learned to look over its shoulder. Amendments tried to seal the promise, citizenship inked into law, while hatred kept scratching.
The nation stitched itself shut, but scars kept breathing, reminding freedom what it cost to live.